few weeks ago when Tom Edmondson lost his farm and came to my office. That was a hard one. He was a quiet man, but he was the kind of guy people listened to, even if he didn't say much. And when he walked in that day, he cut to the chase. All my life, he said, I've been a farmer. I've never wanted to do anything else because I thought feeding people was worth some sweat and some hard times and some backaches. And when I looked out over my fields, I thought to myself, this is what God has given me to do. And I'm going to do it as best as I can. Now that work has been taken away from me, and I want to know why. What do you say when someone feels forsaken by God? The evangelical kids had those wristbands a few years ago. What would Jesus do? But we both knew that Tom Edmondson wasn't Jesus Christ, and we both knew I wasn't Christ either. He said, why has God done this? I said, Tom, every single one of us asks at one point or another, why me? Christ knew what it was all about. He was God incarnate. Yet when the pain came, he still asked the question, why me? Why now? Well, we can never know that. Either we have faith in God's will, that it's greater than anything we can understand in the world, or we don't really have faith in anything at all. I think he knew I was giving it to him straight, and so far as anyone can. He said, I guess I'm not so special. I can avoid what God wants to give me. And I said, you're special. So are we all. But none of us can avoid what God wants for us. We don't know whether it's going to be good or bad, but if it's God's will, we have to trust in it. Period. He nodded, and I thought he got it, at least a little. 2 days later, he went to the barn he no longer owned and blew his head off with a 12 gauge. I had to face the congregation that Sunday and confess that I had failed. I had to say something, but when I walked into the church, I honestly had no idea what it would be. I was at the pulpit about to talk about Tom when someone ran into the church. This wasn't the kind of church where people came late, and it definitely wasn't the kind of church where anyone would run up the aisle. It was Harvey Mason who ran the feed store. He was so out of breath he couldn't speak at first. He just pointed to the windows, those huge windows that made the place boil in the summer and made it expensive to heat in the winter. And there they were, the white streaks in the sky. Everyone had crowded over by those windows. They stood silent for a moment. Then they looked at me. I walked down the aisle of the church and out the door. If you lived 1,000 years, you'd never find words to describe the blue of that sky. I had known that some of the missile silos were close by, but I never visited. I didn't see much point. My protesting days were over, so it came as something of a shock to see they were only about 10 miles to the west. There were 5 trails of smoke in the air, and if you didn't know what they were, you would have said they were beautiful. Just gorgeous streaks against the cloudless sky, like some huge decoration, like the 4th of July. The rest of the congregation had followed me outside. Harvey Mason had caught his breath, but he'd started to weep. In between sobs, he said, LA, Frisco, Seattle, all gone. We stood there for a long time. Then Walt Haney said, we don't deserve this. I turned around. I felt anger welling up in me that I'd never felt back east, not even when I'd gotten arrested or spat on during demonstrations. I said, we built a nation on land we stole from people who had been living here for thousands of years. We built it with the labor of people who had been stolen from their homes and forced to come here. We bought and sold them like cattle, and even after we freed them, we treated them like dirt. We were at war for most of our history, mostly in countries we didn't understand and where we didn't know what we were fighting for. We celebrated violence every day in the sports we loved and the movies we watched. We watched the rich tear the poor to shreds, and we said nothing. We let ourselves get torn apart, and instead of standing up, we set up boogeymen and scapegoats and false enemies, and we let our leaders get away with theft and murder and enough hypocrisy to choke an elephant. We lived as if these things were normal. Now you say we didn't deserve this. I pointed to the white smoke trails in the sky 10 miles west. Who are you trying to kid? In that moment, I hated them all. I hated their self-righteousness and their smugness and their narrowness, and because of that hatred, I knew in the pit of my soul that I was no better than any of them. Someone in the crowd said, Pastor, what do we do now? I had no idea what they should do. But I knew the radiation cloud would come from the west. I looked to where the white streaks from the missiles were still lingering there in the sky. I started walking toward the cloud. I didn't look back.